Hi everyone, this is Kim Elia and welcome to the second part in the VithoulkasCompass webinar series. I wanted to start tonight by focusing on success in homeopathy. We all talk about success in practice and how we have a cured case here and a cured case there, and the type of success that I'd like to discuss is the type of success where you consistently have good results in your practice, where you go into your office or wherever you're practicing on a daily basis, and you know that the majority of the patients that you are going to be treating are going to get well, that you're going to have people coming back to you during their follow-up visits saying, thank you so much, that remedy you prescribed for me has changed my life. Because I believe it's that type of success that will lead to the overall success of homeopathy in the world. If we look at what's happening in homeopathy presently, today, there are areas of the world where it is growing, but for the most part, homeopathy is not growing, and I think there's a number of contributing factors to this, but one of the primary factors is that people are not achieving or seeing the level of success that they would like to see in their own practices, and this is translating to a situation where people are dropping out from practicing. They graduate from their schools, but they don't continue after a few years. The schools are having fewer and fewer enrollees, and we can see the results of this are comparable to what we saw in the early 20th century when homeopathy began to decline and ultimately declined in the 1940s and 1950s, almost to the point of completely disappearing from the map of medical health care. So success in homeopathy is critical on an individual level to the overall success of homeopathy as a great science and medical art. Now, we've seen success in our past. A good example of this is in 1799 when Hahnemann discovered belladonna as what was referred to as the genus epidemicus in the use of the scarlatina or scarlet fever outbreaks which were occurring in Europe at that time. And he discovered that belladonna was the remedy that would treat most of the cases of scarlatina that were erupting during that period, and that not only did it work therapeutically, but that it also worked prophylactically in the treatment of this quite serious disease. We also saw that even though Hahnemann was very successful, that he was severely attacked for his use of belladonna based on this new principle, similia similibus. However, even though he was attacked, it's very interesting that a number of years later, in 1838, that the Prussian government actually ordered the doctors of the country of Prussia to use belladonna in small doses, again, against the epidemics of scarlet fever, which were prevalent at that particular period of time. We saw the great success that Hahnemann achieved at the end of the Napoleonic Wars around 1813 in the treatment of typhoid fever. Again, this was a success that silenced the critics that were up against homeopathy during that period of time. And again, it demonstrated the truth of the great principle that Hahnemann had rediscovered and had basically codified in the form of homeopathic practice. We saw this success continue in the 1830s. Even though homeopathy was illegal in Austria, many people sought homeopathic treatment. And during the cholera epidemic of 1831, we saw that homeopathy had a mortality rate of somewhere between 2.4% to 21.1%, whereas the medical conventional treatment of that time was producing a success rate of closer to 50%, which was very comparable to no treatment whatsoever. So again, it demonstrated the efficacy and power of homeopathic practice relative to other forms of treatment like regular medical orthodox allopathic medical treatment. We saw this success continue when Hahnemann moved to Paris in the 1833 to 1834 period, where he was already very successful from all the great work that he had done in treating cholera and typhoid and the great successes he had had with scarlatina. And when he arrived in Paris with his new wife Melanie, patients came from all over Europe to seek help because they had heard of the great successes that Hahnemann had achieved in treating so many different types of acute and chronic diseases. Sculptors and creative artists and essayists and opera singers, actors, actresses, the French aristocracy, the British aristocracy, other homeopathic doctors, Paganini, the great violin virtuoso, all of these people congregated to Paris to see Hahnemann and to seek out the power and incredible efficacy of this new system of medicine. And because of this great success that Hahnemann had achieved, and that the followers of Hahnemann were also achieving in the use of homeopathy, it began to spread throughout the world. First, only through wasn't really called Germany at the time, but Saxony and the other principalities, which later on went to form Germany. But it moved from there into other parts of Europe, and eventually into the British Isles, and then into South America and Russia, and really all over the world. It became something that became adopted in the various nation states of the planet during the early 1800s through the late 1800s. Again, because of the fact that it did work, it was so powerful, it was so successful in treating both acute and chronic diseases. And we even saw that in the United States when there was the 1849 cholera epidemic, of the epidemic of the South, that the homeopaths had significantly greater success than the allopaths who were treating those who were afflicted with cholera. We can even see the great success that the people, the great practitioners of our heritage had, the ones who followed Hahnemann. Here's a quote from Constantine Herring, who had cut his finger and found that arsenic had been incredibly successful in the treatment of his finger and prevented gangrene. And afterwards he contacted Hahnemann, and he learned the science and art of homeopathy. And afterwards he wrote, my enthusiasm grew. I became a fanatic. I went about the country, visited inns, where I got up on tables and benches to harangue whoever might be present to listen to my enthusiastic speeches on homeopathy. I told the people that they were in the hands of cutthroats and murderers. Success came everywhere. I almost thought I could raise the dead. Incredible. He saw the success. He was so confident in his ability, he thought he could raise the dead. And then we have these great practitioners like Adolf Lippe, who is considered by many to have been one of the most clinically successful homeopathic practitioners of all time. Lippe, who practiced for almost 50 years in the Philadelphia area with one of extremely busy practice, who saw hundreds and hundreds of cases of typhoid, cholera, and malaria, and in 50 years of busy practice never lost one cholera, one typhoid, or one malaria patient. 50 years of busy practice, he never had a failure. And this is during a period of time when the mortality rate of these diseases was extremely high. Just like Herring had no failures in treating pneumonia, which had a mortality rate of about 30 to 40%, Lippe had 100% success in typhoid, cholera, and malaria, which were conditions which had anywhere between 40 to 60% mortality rates. Incredible. Eugene Boharis Nash tells this incredible story of a man dying of cholera, and they send for the master Lippe, and Lippe shows up at the door and puts his foot into the door and hears the man's breathing and says, "Quick, give him zinc," and they give a dose of zinc to the dying man with cholera, and within an hour the symptoms begin to subside, and 24 hours later he's asymptomatic, again demonstrating the power and incredible efficacy that homeopathy has when practiced correctly. And we have the stories of Joseph Hippolyte Pulta, okay, who, when he first moved to Cincinnati and people discovered that he was a homeopath, it angered the crowds, and they pelted his house with eggs, and they drove logs through his carriage wheels, and he almost left. His wife said, "Well, if you really believe in homeopathy, you should stay." And when the cholera epidemic swept through Cincinnati, Pulte didn't lose a single patient. And in the epidemic of 1849, people crowded to his doors and stood in the streets to see him. Again, the amazing power and efficacy of homeopathic practice. And all of this, what did it lead to? It led to homeopathy becoming the popular mode, the accepted mode of treatment during the middle 19th century. And if you had any type of money and you had any type of education, the type of practitioner you went to see was a homeopath. So that by 1862, the homeopaths controlled 110 homeopathy hospitals, over 30 nursing homes, 62 orphan asylums and retirement homes, and 16 insane asylums in the United States. Homeopathy was the preferred choice of medical treatment in the 1860s and early 1870s in the United States. Why? Because it was so successful. And we look at the great journals of the time, the Organon Journal, which was edited by Adolf Lippe and Skinner, Berridge, and Swan, and you look at these incredible cured cases that were, again, presented on sound principles and just amazing results, one after another. Same thing in the IHA transactions, which are the essential record of some of the best homeopathy that's ever been practiced, the literal clinical experience of some of the greatest homeopathic practitioners who have ever lived. And when you read these transactions, you see what the possibility of homeopathy is, what it can achieve, the incredible level of success that is the promise of good homeopathic practice. We see this very clearly stated in Thomas Lindsley Bradford's Logic of Figures, which was a book that was published in 1900 and which statistically demonstrated the superiority of homeopathic treatment over allopathic treatment in a variety of different disease conditions, where the homeopathic practitioners had mortality rates that ranged between 2 to 4%, and the eclectic and allopathic physicians had mortality rates that ranged between 40 to 60%. A statistically significant demonstration of the power of homeopathy. And we see this in current times in the work of George Vithoulkas. Many of you may have heard of, it would almost be like a magic show. George would come to the United States, and I've heard the stories of how he would see, 40 or 50 patients in a matter of 2, 3, 4 hours. And when they would do the follow-ups a month or 6 weeks later, out of the 50 patients, 49 of them would have gotten well. And this is the level of practice that we need to have if we're going to be successful on an individual level, and if we're going to make homeopathy successful on a global level. So, are we seeing this today? Is this the type of success that's going on? Well, I have the good opportunity to travel around the world. I teach in all over North America. I teach in Europe. I've taught in Central America. I've taught in Asia. I've ran extensive homeopathy programs, in all of these various locations. And this is not what, for the most part, that I see. I see that people are very much discouraged about their ability to practice on a consistent and successful level today. And so we need to find what are the recipes for success. How can we remedy this particular situation? What can we do on an individual level and also on an institutional level that will result in greater success both individually and globally? I think, first of all, we have to have an understanding of our history. We have to know where we came from. As George Santayana wrote, if we don't know our history, we're bound to repeat its mistakes. So we want to know what the history of homeopathy is, where we've made errors in the past so that we don't repeat them again in the future. We have to have a grounding in the Organon, that great work that went through 6 editions, that is the seminal opus of Hahnemann. Lippe, that great practitioner who had such great success, 50 years of practice, never lost one typhoid, cholera, or malaria patient. He read the Organon twice a year for 50 years. And after 50 years, he said, I'm just beginning to fully understand the Organon. So we have to understand this work. You can't fully understand the Organon by reading it once or twice. You have to study it over many years, and then you see the depth of wisdom and genius contained in that great work. We have to study the cases from the old journals, these great homeopaths like Adolf Lippe, like Constantine Hering, like Clemens von Maria Bunninghausen, like Phineas Parkhurst Wells, like Eugene Boharris Nash, like Henry Clay Allen, these great masters who had demonstrated the possibility of success in homeopathy. We need to go back and read their cases and understand how did they practice. And we have to look at these practitioners and see how did they think, what was their thinking process, how did they learn, how did they study, how did they develop the skills that made them so successful in their own practices. We also have to have a knowledge of the repertory. As George Vithoulkas aptly said, you know, in other fields maybe not having a knowledge or not having a book is a sign of knowledge. In homeopathy, having a repertory is a sign that you understand the importance of this great work. A repertory is the foundation. It's the beginning part of the process in identifying the best remedy in any individual case. And of course, we have to know our materia medica. We have to study the remedies so that we are capable of making a differentiation and selecting the one that really is most appropriate in any individual case. And of course, all of this rides on a skill in case taking, or what is sometimes referred as case receiving. We have to have that ability. If we don't take the case properly, well, it doesn't matter what we know about the organon or the repertory or materia medica. We won't have the information required to be able to prescribe a remedy that will really help, as it says in the 9th aphorism of the organon, will really help that person to reach the lofty goal of human existence. And I would say today, one of the recipes for success is the use of computer technology. Homeopathy lends itself to computer technology because we have this vast body of information, this incredible repertory full of remedies and materia medica, and Berkey's got whatever 14 or 1500 remedies. How can you memorize all of this information? And here we have the modern technology of the day lending itself seamlessly in such a manner that it can assist us and support us in achieving greater levels of success. Now, of course, it's true that you put in garbage and you get out garbage. Garbage in, garbage out. So we need all of these skills, but it's also true that the technology, the computer software, has this capacity to really support and help us. And in many of the schools that teach, they say, well, don't invest in a homeopathic software program right away. Use your books. And I remember a number of years ago, a close friend of mine who was just first starting to study homeopathy came to me and said, well, I'm just starting. Do you think that I should invest in a homeopathic software program? And I said, well, if it was up to me, I would do it, because as long as you use it intelligently, it will only help you to learn more quickly. And so she took my advice, and she was the only one in her class who went out and purchased a homeopathic software program. And what was amazing was that by the end of the year, she knew maybe 10 times more homeopathy than any of her fellow students. She had endured significantly less stress than any of them in accomplishing all of her homework assignments, and she knew and had the highest grades in the whole class. So it was a clear demonstration that used wisely, used intelligently, that these programs can dramatically facilitate not only your ability to practice homeopathy, but your ability to understand and learn this great science and art. And this leads me to the topic of discussion this evening, which is a wonderful new program on the market. It's an internet-based program based on subscription called the VithoulkasCompass. And I'd like to basically tonight look at how we can use this program to increase our success, that we can begin to approach, again, with all of those other things taken into consideration, how we can begin to approach the great success that is our birthright and that was achieved in our glorious past. This is where we need to go, and we should utilize tools like this because they are a boon to our ability to go out there and feel the level of confidence that we can build our practice and make homeopathy grow throughout the world, so that it's not just the second largest system of medicine in the world, but it becomes the first and most important system of medicine in the whole world. So having said that, what I'd like to focus on now is a few different cases where we can actually kind of go through the VithoulkasCompass system. We can learn how it works and also demonstrate what are its advantages, how it can help you in your own practice and understanding of homeopathy. All right. So I have a case here, and I thought what might be fun is to actually work on the case of one of my colleagues. There's been somebody who's been exploring the Vithoulkas system, and he's been talking about the cases of Dr. Will Taylor. Dr. Taylor is a close colleague of mine. He does done quite a bit of teaching with me in the past, and also does the brunt of our teaching for Whole Health Now. And so I thought I would take one of his cases. This is actually a case that he has presented before. I thought we could read through the case and then see how we could look at the Vithoulkas expert system's ability to analyze this case and suggest a remedy that was successfully prescribed. So I'll go ahead and read through the case, and then we'll go ahead and look at a numerical repertorization, and then we'll also go ahead and look at how the Vithoulkas expert system, what it suggests as the best remedy choice. So this is a 19-year-old girl, and her chief complaint is that she's dragging, and this has been since she developed mono. So she's had mono or mononucleosis, glandular fever, an acute Epstein-Barr virus infection. 3 months ago, she was going around in the dorm at her school, and it's pretty classic. She gets a sore throat with massively swollen glands. She has fatigue. But all of her friends seem to get over it, but she says that she's still sick. And as a consequence, she had to drop out of all of her classes and actually take off the whole term. She's totally tired all the time, has no energy to do anything at all. She says, my hair's turned all dry and dull, and it's been falling out from the roots. She's also getting tons of canker sores. And she says, I'm cold all the time. I just can't get warm. So she's asked the standard opening question that we learn in homeopathy, which is what else? And she says headaches. I have these spells where I get all jittery, all this nervous energy. She says, I've been juicing and eating a lot of eggs, trying to get extra protein in my diet. And she says, my mom's into all that. She says, I don't have much of an appetite, and trying to get 10 hours of sleep a night. But I fall asleep a lot during the day and wake up at night feeling all jittery and can't get back to sleep. So Dr. Taylor says, so tell me about jittery. And she says, it happens in the day too. I just feel like there's electricity running through my body. I feel all shaky. And so Dr. Taylor says, would I see you shake? And she says, no. Well, when I try to hold on to something like eating or trying to hold on to a book, it's like I'm too weak to hold on to things and I get shaky. You know, like if you pulled 3 all-nighters, like electricity. I don't know how to explain it to anybody, like those jitters when you crashed after too much sugar. It's just weird. And so Dr. Taylor goes on. He says, cold all the time. You can see these kind of general open-ended questions that are so useful that don't lead the patient in a particular direction. She responds, I can't get warm. And then doctor says, you keep the house at, and she says 70 degrees Fahrenheit or 21 degrees Celsius. She goes on, she says, I just feel chilled through, like when you're coming down with the flu or something. Usually I'm pretty warm-blooded. Dr. Taylor says, your whole body or more in some parts? She says, I get chills up and down my back, like down my spine. I keep wrapped up in an Afghan and usually sit in front of an electric heater during the day, cranked all the way up. Dr. Taylor says, and does that warm you up comfortably, or? She says, it helps. I still feel chilled. Then he says, headaches? And she responds, here she gestures broadly to her right temple and peridium, And Dr. Taylor says, and they feel, and she says, just dull, achy, like something pulling at my brain inside. And Dr. Taylor says, like on a scale of 1 to 10, how bad? And she says, 2 to 5, mostly 2, worse in the evening. Dr. Taylor says, other things in the evening? And then she says, that's when I feel the chills the worst, and the jitteriness is worst. And Dr. Taylor says, anything makes the headache better or worse? And she responds, nope. Well, Tylenol helps a little. Dr. Taylor says, heat or cold, eating, drinking, sitting up or lying down, dark noise. He's giving her a number of options, not leading her, but just a number of possibilities, just to jog her memory. And then she responds, they're worse when I get really chilled, but nothing really helps. I've tried a hot barley pillow. It feels good, but doesn't really help the headache. It feels better just to hold it here, and now she's up against her belly, and wrap up under my Afghan with it. Then Dr. Taylor says, tell me about the canker sores. She says, mostly on my tongue. They make it hard to eat. And I've had a few way back near my tonsils that have made it hard to swallow. There's one there now. Dr. Taylor continuing says, so sleeping? And she says, I don't know. I think my cycles are just thrown off. I'm exhausted, but my nerves won't let me sleep. I mean, I fall asleep, but I keep waking up and feeling all jittery. And I'm used to sleeping on my side, but I can't. And Dr. says, you can't? Well, it's not comfortable. And Dr. says, not comfortable in what way? Well, it just feels heavy. And here she's gesturing to the left upper abdomen. Lying, and Doctor says, lying on your left or on your right? And she says, either. I need to lie flat on my back, and I've never slept well that way. And Dr. Taylor, continuing with the line of thought, says, heavy? She says, well, just bloated or something. My mom tells me I should get more fresh air, but it's just too cold. It's late November in Maine, but there have been some sunny days in the 60s. Even just an open window. So you can see this thing about the coldness. She's really very much aggravated by the cold in a variety of different ways. Dr. Taylor goes on. He says, other things? And she says, that's not enough, as if, this is very common where, I've spilled my guts here, but, you still want more information. And so he continues, well, when was your last period? And she says, oh, that's another thing. My periods have stopped. I'm not pregnant. Dr. Tiss says, you're certain? And she says, absolutely. And then he says, spotting or any sensation that you associate with having a period? And she says, I'm having a lot of discharge. Dr. Taylor wants qualification, so he says, discharge? Well, this is embarrassing. And Dr. Taylor, to reassure her, says, listen, I'm a doctor, I'm sorry, and we're used to such things, and it may be important for me to know. So she continues. She says, just staining in my panties, and I need to wash a couple of times a day. Dr. Taylor wants clarification again, so he says, it's like thick, thin, white, yellow, brown. And so she responds, thick, kind of yellowish. So then Dr. Taylor says, is there any redness or irritation? And she says, not really. It's just sticky and doesn't feel clean. Anything else? Well, I've been having, what do you call it when your heart skips beats? And this, of course, is quite interesting. He says, Dr. Taylor says, tell me about that. And she says, mostly when I try to walk and I get this feeling, now she's gesturing over her heart, kind of rapid, irregular beating. And so Dr. Taylor says, anything else going on when that is happening? And she says, it is usually when I try to walk when I'm feeling really weak. He wants further clarification, so he says, any dizziness or faintness or nausea or... And then she says, oh, I almost forgot. If I try to roll over on my side, I get woozy. Woozy? Just things kind of feel unsteady for a moment. Unsteady? Again, not putting words in the mouth, just repeating the word and allowing the patient to clarify what the symptom really represents. Like wavy. Wavy? Like if you were spinning and stop all of a sudden just for a moment. Uh, is that why it's uncomfortable to sleep on your side? No, it just feels bloated, indicating again her left upper abdomen. When you lie on that side or on the other side, either, I don't know, bloated or heavy, like it's weird. And then Dr. Kaler continues, the wooziness. Do you get that at other times as well? And she says, there's kind of a background of that all the time, just faint. It comes when I'm lying down and roll over on my side. And again, which side? And then she's reflecting for a moment. She says, either. I guess more to my left. I'm not sure now what I think about it. I think it's more to my left. Okay, so this is the case as Dr. Taylor presented it on one of his previous sessions. And then he wrote under objective that several lymph nodes in the cervical chains, the tonsils were borderline enlarged. He did an abdominal exam, and it was significant for dullness to percussion to 4 centimeters below the left costal margin in the mid-clavicular line. And the spleen tip felt on deep palpation at the same point rounded. The liver was normal. Now that you shouldn't be able to feel the spleen at all. So if you feel the tip on deep palpation at the same point as the percussion, that's an indication of an extremely enlarged spleen. So as an objective symptom here in the case, we can certainly affirm that there's a very enlarged spleen. Okay, so this is the case, and I'm going to show you the repertorization of this case. These were the rubrics that Dr. Taylor chose, and I'll just read through them quickly here. So he chose mind restlessness, internal, vertigo turning in the bed aggravates, head hair dryness, head hair falling, head hair lusterless, head pain during the chill, the canker sores, which is mouth aphthai, and especially mouth aphthai in the tongue, the throat aphthai, the enlarged spleen, the thin leukorrhea, which is yellow, the absent menses, the chill beginning in the back, and the chill which is not ameliorated in a warm room nor by a warm stove. And then he chose the in generalities the rubric for the disease condition mononucleosis. And you can see the first remedy in this numerical repertorization is sulfur. Sulfur has a tendency, as for those of you who practice for any significant period of time, has a tendency to come up number 1 quite a bit. It is the most well-represented remedy in the entire repertoire. It's in approximately 22,000 rubrics, and so it oftentimes appears high on the list. It's not an uncommon remedy in practice, but as Ken said, it's not indicated in every case, and certainly not as oft frequently as it comes up in your repertorization. So it actually, I wouldn't think, it's a possible remedy here, but it doesn't really fit the characterizing symptoms as well as I might like. And then you've got Natmur, which again doesn't really seem to fit the case. Nux vomica, Bryonia, Arsenicum, Phosphorus, Lachesis, Calcareous sepia, Dulcamara, China, Nitricum acidum, Belladonna, Mercurius, Silica, Lycopodium, Rustoxiodum, Sulfuricum acidum, Cocculus, Pulsatilla, Graphites, Spongia, Carboveg, Phosphoric acid, Thuya, Ignatia, Apis, Arsenicum iodatum, Conium, Capsicum, Arsenicum sulfur fluoratum, bovista, creosotum, veratrum album, ferrum metallicum, drosera. Okay, you get the point. There's a lot of remedies coming up, and none of these, interestingly enough, is the remedy that was prescribed by Dr. Taylor, which was the remedy that successfully cured the case. So we're all the way down 38 remedies. It's very unlikely that you're going to read this many remedies down in the list. And again, this clearly demonstrates the deficiency associated with numerical repertorization. The problem with numerical repertorization is that the polycrest remedies, sulfur, lycopodium, calcarea, belladonna, lachesis, phosphorus, these remedies are overly well represented in our repertories and in our materia medicas, and they have a tendency to come up even when they're not the best indicated remedy for the particular patient in front of you. And also, many rubrics are incomplete. They're deficient in some of the smaller remedies, and sometimes these are the best remedy for the case. So let's switch over to the Vithoulkas expert system now, and we'll go ahead and here it is. Okay, so now we're in the Vithoulkas expert system. This is the opening screen once you've logged in that you would arrive at. And I'm going to go ahead and just do this. I'm going to actually go ahead and do it just so you can see how it actually works. I'll click on my cases, okay, and here you can see a number of cases that I've been playing around with. And I'm going to create a new case here, so I'll click over here and create a new case, okay. And you have to give the case a name, so I'll call it, I'll call it young woman, okay. And the main case, the main complaint was mono, okay. It was a female, and we'll just make her, we'll have her born 1971, and it doesn't matter who was referred, okay. And then we'll go ahead and click over here on create the case. Okay, now I just want to show everybody that the last time that I used on the first session time I did this, I chose, I had selected 2 panes. This time I've selected 3 panes as the default for the program. Oh. And so the advantage of this is I could actually see the analysis and the rubrics and the case notes or the repertory all at the same time. And you'll see the advantage of this in just a minute. So we're going to start now. We've got our case. We're going to start by clicking on New Consultation. Okay, and now you can see the 3-pane effect. Here I can type in my case notes. If I wanted, I could go back here to the case. And for example, I could copy. I'll just show you. If you have your cases in another location, you could just copy this like this. Okay, and go back and you could either type your case in under case notes here, or you could paste it in from another location. And there you can see I pasted in from another document my case, and then that way it's very easy. I can read the case right over here, and I can begin to repertorize the symptoms over here on the right, and then they will go over here, and then will be able to very quickly and easily click on the solve and see my repertorization over here on the right hand side. So it's a better layout than the 2-pane layout. So I'm just going to go ahead and search for the symptoms. One of the nice things about this is I don't really have to know the structure of the repertoire. You can search through the structure, but it works very nicely and very easily to simply search for the words that you're looking for. There were some comments from the first session that I conducted. There was a few people actually said, "Oh well, Kim makes it look so easy." You know, it wasn't that I was making it look so easy. It really is a very easy and simple and streamlined program to use. It's not difficult at all. You could literally learn it, I think, in an hour and a half, 2 hours max, just based on the tutorials that built into the software. So it's very simple to use. That doesn't mean it's not powerful. It's also extremely powerful. But simplicity and power are independent ideas. They don't have to. They're not necessarily linked together. So let's go ahead and repertorize this. So the first thing is the enlarged spleen. So I'll just type in enlarged. Okay, and then type in the word spleen. Okay, and then I'll hit enter. And here you can see. Let me get rid of this little thing here. Here you can see enlarged spleen. Okay, if you ever want to see the remedies, they're in a particular rubric. You can click on the little arrow to the left here, and you can see all those remedies. I don't really care about that. I don't need to see the remedies because I'm going to choose this symptom because it's the symptom of the case. So this was very important. It was really quite enlarged, and I'm going to give it an intensity of 4. It's very important to underline when using the VithoulkasCompass expert system. It's really contingent upon underlining. Not all models or approaches to homeopathy use underlining, but this approach is very reliant on underlining. Remember, underlining has a number of different qualities associated. One is the how voluntarily the patient shares that information, the strength of the symptom, and the frequency of the symptom. So if you've got those all in a very strong degree, then you might give a 3 or 4 underlining. I think we should underline this 4 times. We'll go ahead and do that. So I'll click on the 4, and as soon as I do that, you can see on the left here the rubric abdomen enlarged spleen appears with a degree 4. You can always change this later on if you want, but it automatically goes in with a degree 4. The next symptom was this idea of warm room, and you couldn't get heated up by a stove. So I'll type in warm room stove, okay, and I'll hit enter. And here you can see the rubric I'm looking for here is chill, warm room not ameliorated in nor by a warm stove. And again, this is a very strong symptom. She was extremely cold. She could not get warm whatsoever, and I think we're going to give this a 4 as well. So we'll go ahead and click on that, and you can see the rubric appears over on the left hand side with a degree 4. We also had the chill that was beginning in the back. So chill beginning back, okay, and we'll hit enter. And again, here we see chill beginning in the back. That's the symptom we want. This was pretty strong as well, and fairly characteristic in the case. So we won't give it quite as high as the 2 first ones. We'll give it a 3. So we'll put that one in. And we also had the head pain during the chill. So let's go ahead and put that one in. So head pain chill, and we hit enter. And here we can see head pain chill. Where is it? Head pain during the chill, right? This one right here. And again, this was fairly strong, fairly characteristic. So we'll go ahead and give that 3 underlining. Okay. The next symptom that we could use is the apthai in the tongue, or canker sores in the tongue. So we type in APHTHAE, tongue. Okay, and we hit enter. And here we go, mouth, apthai, tongue. This maybe wasn't quite as strong, so maybe we give this a 2. So we'll give that a 2. You see it appears on the left-hand side. And then we've got that restlessness, the internal restlessness. So we can type in restlessness, internal. Again, we hit enter. And here we get mind, restlessness, nervous, internal. Fairly strong, but I don't think it's high as the other one, so we'll give it we'll click on the 2, give it an intensity of 2. She also had the throat apthai, so let's put that in. So throat. Okay, we hit enter, and there we've got the throat apthai, and again we'll give that a 2 as well. There was also the rubric, the generalis rubric for mononucleosis. So we'll put that in, mononucleosis, mononucleosis. We hit enter, and there we've got generalis mononucleosis. Now, this is a disease condition. I generally don't want to put these in a higher intensity, so we'll put this in as a 1. We click on the 1 to put that in. We also had the mouth apthai. Those weren't quite as strong as what she had on the tongue, so maybe we'll just we'll put that in with an intensity of 1. So mouth apthai. Okay, mouth apthai. Put that in, enter, and here we've got mouth apthai, and we'll put that in with an intensity of 1. We had the leukorrhea symptoms. We should put those in. So leukorrhea, thick, thick. Okay, so here we've got leukorrhea thick. And by the way, did you notice that it didn't matter whether I spelled it with the OE or just the EA, it found it regardless. That's very nice. So it gives you a little bit of room for in case you make errors. So leukorrhea thick, this wasn't the center of the pathology of the case, so we'll give this a 1. Okay, and then we'll do the leukorrhea yellow. RHOEA, yellow, enter. And here's the leukorrhea yellow. Again, it's not really the center of the case anymore, so we'll just give it an intensity of 1. We did have the vertigo turning in the bed. Okay, so let's put that in. Vertigo turning bed. We'll hit enter. And so that symptom was vertigo turning in the bed. Again, we'll give that a 1. We had the amenorrhea. So Menzies absent. Okay, Menzies absent. And we'll, again, not the center pathology in the case, we'll give that a 1. And then we had the hair dryness. Okay, again, lower level symptom, give it a 1. And then the hair falling. Hair falling, again, we'll give that a 1. And then the hair lusterless. Okay. Lusterless. Okay, oops, did I type that wrong? Hair, Lusterless. Enter. There we go. Hair lusterless, and we'll give that a 1. Now these are the same symptoms, same rubrics that I put in before. Here you can see them on the right here, all the different intensities. If I ever want to combine any of these later on, I can click over here under where it says other options, and I can merge symptoms. Okay, so that's always a possibility after the fact if you want to group rubrics together. That's an important feature in homeopathic repertorization. I can always change the intensity at any time as well. These are the same rubrics that I chose in this repertorization here. Okay, and you could see when I chose this repertorization, we went 38, 39 remedies down the list, and the remedy that Dr. Taylor gave was not anywhere in that list. You can see here, I'll move it back across this way so you can see a bunch of the remedies. Let's see what the VithoulkasCompass expert system produces. So again, very simple. I can type in my case or paste it in here, read the symptoms, just type in the words, find the rubrics, click on the appropriate intensity I'd like to assign to each of those symptoms, and then the rubrics go over here on the left hand side. Once I've done that, all I got to do is click on the solve button over here. And lo and behold, you will see that under proposed remedies, you have 3 options here. You have all the remedies, you have the large remedies, which one, if you're going to choose a polycrest or a larger remedy, which ones it would suggest, and then you have under small remedies, which ones it would suggest. But when you look at the all, that includes both the large and the small, the remedy which comes up number 1 is Ceanothus americanus. And this is a very well-known remedy for spleen problems. It has many of the other symptoms in this case. You can see here it's number 1 in all the remedies. Under proposed small remedies, it's number 1 as well. And it shows you that the case was very much focused on the enlarged spleen, the chill that was beginning in the back, and the aphthoi in the tongue, and the headache, the head pain during the chill. These were some of the symptoms that were very important for the analysis. But the bottom line is that it came up with the remedy that was actually successfully prescribed. And this, you can see, is the beauty of the VithoulkasCompass expert system, that it uses these very sophisticated algorithmic rules to emulate the way that Professor Vithoulkas would look at a case. You have to understand that in homeopathic practice, you're not really matching symptoms to symptoms, um, or the total numerical quantity of symptoms. You're matching a complex of symptoms, a relationship of symptoms. So it's really pattern recognition that makes for a good practitioner. And this is what an expert system can do that numerical repetition can't do. The truth is that when I go back to the Radar Opus program and look at the numerical repetition, the Ceanothus did not come up until number 40 in the repetition. And it's very unlikely that you would look this far down your list to find the remedy. But once you go back, you can now click over here under Materia Medica, and you can click on the letter C here, and you can simply scroll down a little bit, and you get to Ceanothus, and you can click on it, and then you can read, this remedy specific relation to the spleen, left-sided remedy, chronic bronchitis, and you can read these symptoms and see if it really fits the case. Now, this is where I really like to also use my integrated with the VithoulkasCompass, my radar program. I like the fact that this can make good remedy suggestions, but I also like the fact that I can go to radar and I can open up my advanced search window. I can click here on search and go to advanced search, and I can type in the remedy Ceanothus, okay, Americanus, and I can hit enter a couple of times, and I will have literally a huge number of resources available to me. All of these repertories where I've extracted all of the rubrics which contain Ceanothus, and also many Materia Medicas that have results for this, provings, journals, proceedings, all kinds of information that I can read about it. And I can even as well, if I want to clear this out by clicking on the eraser here, I can go to cases, chapters, pathologies, and I can type in Ceanothus case remedy, and I can just pull up cases of Ceanothus. So now I can read through and find cases from really excellent old journals like the Homeopathic Physician. I don't know if you remember I mentioned the IHA transactions, which were the transactions of the International Hahnemannian Association, the official organ, the official public journal for the International Hahnemannian Association was the journal called the Homeopathic Physician. It was a really great journal. The Hahnemannian Advocate was another really great journal. The Homeopathic Recorder was the journal that picked up when the IHA transaction stopped and continued into the 1950s. So I have access to all this great literature, and I can read through cases and see if there's any other cases in the literature which might show something, a case that was similar. And here you can see, here's a Ceanothus case, infection of the spleen, intermittent fever, and I could read this particular case. So this just shows the wonderful complementary effect, benefits that I can have, the synergetic effect that I have between using the VithoulkasCompass and the Radar Opus software. Okay, well let's try to do one more case. Let's go back. Let's do this case. Case of an acquaintance. I'm going to read through it fairly quickly. So this was a peculiar appointment of an acquaintance. This is not Dr. Taylor's case, by the way. This was a peculiar appointment of an acquaintance of many years who could not muster enough courage to ask for an appointment. It took her more than 6 months to finally come to me via my sister. I had a feeling as if she was ashamed of something. She had come with the following complaints. A. Blisters in the mouth and inflamed tongue since many months. It was steadily increasing. The tongue looked raw, and it's a 3 underlining, in patches. There was coating of dirty yellow and gray color in patches on the interior 2/3 of the tongue. It was the most horrible tongue I had ever seen. She was aggravated from spices in food. B. She had insomnia since 3 days, as she always heard footsteps in her room. She felt as if someone woke her up. She invariably woke up with a jerk from sleep. She felt very scared, but did not know why. She had C. Swollen eruptions spreading in a circular pattern as from wheals on the right forearm, and that's a 2 underline, and also the right hand, 3 underline. And this was during the menses since 2 cycles. D. She feels tensed and shivers without reason. Feels very weak and has sudden blackouts, which last a few seconds. And this started after a weight reduction program wherein she's supposed to skip meals. E, she had a falling of hair. F, she had depression. G, she had swelling and pain of the right leg, which was aggravated by exertion and by getting wet in the rain, and was ameliorated by raising the leg for prolonged periods and also by warm fomentation. There was a history of venograft in the same leg for iliofemoral thrombosis from many years ago. She craves cold things, that's a 3 underlining, and is averse to meat. Her perspiration leaves yellow delible stains, that's a 2 underlining. She sleeps on her abdomen. Her sleep is full of vivid dreams, and she wakes up exhausted, especially much more than on retiring. She also feels very scared at night. She jerks in her sleep, 3 underlining, as if falling from a height or as if something is thrown over her. And she also jerks when taking a nap during the day, and that's 2 underlines. She is the youngest of 4 girls. Her mother died when she was very young. Her father remarried against the wishes of the children. All of them feel that the stepmother will take away the property and other assets. This is common, obviously. Over the years, everyone except the patient compromised, and the relations of sisters and stepmother improved. Now, this is interesting. They all at first had this common feeling that the stepmother might take the property and other assets, but eventually the other sisters, other family members realized, okay, it's okay. They compromised, but she didn't. Somehow, and this kind of demonstrates that this is an area of pathology for her. So she still finds it difficult to adjust. She feels she is ill-treated, like Cinderella. We oftentimes call this the Cinderella complex. She feels her stepmother incites quarrels between father and daughter, and this is a 3 underlining, very strong. She says, and these are her words, "My very own father sides with her. My very own sisters also blame me and sympathize with my stepmother. I feel neglected," 3 underlinings, "and lonely in my own house. The atmosphere at home depresses me. As long as I'm away from home, I feel good. But the moment I enter my house, I feel surrounded by something. Kind of a depressing influence envelops me. It's just like an iron filing which comes under the influence of a magnetic field." She goes on to say, "All my problems started when I cooled off at home. I don't retaliate nowadays. Initially, I was short-fused." She says, "I love good clothes and desperately want to become thin. I exercise like a maniac in spite of my flat feet. I like jewelry, especially of the ethnic kind." On more direct questioning, it was revealed that tight clothes aggravated her, especially around the neck and the waist. And there's a very important rubric here: external throat clothing aggravates, and there's a number of remedies that we think of. Lachesis has this very strongly. Apis has it. So there's just some remedies that we think of right away. Especially we think of Lachesis immediately as one of those polycrest remedies that can't have anything tight around their throat. For those of you who know a little about the history of homeopathy, there was a remedy that was proven by Constantine Herring. Herring proved it on July 28, 1828. He accidentally ingested some of the Lachesis or Bushmaster, the Surucucu snake, and he went into a kind of delirium where he became very jealous and loquacious, and he developed all the symptoms of a Lachesis poisoning. And subsequent to that, he could never wear anything tight around his collar, around his throat, because he had permanently grafted on that particular symptom of external throat clothing aggravates. She says in the case, she continues, she can't tolerate very loose clothing either. She has a deja vu phenomena quite frequently. Okay, so that's the case. And let me go first of all and show you the repertorization in the radar program. So I'll go over to radar and I will pull it up. Okay. And here is the repertorization. Okay. And okay, so you can see here are the rubrics. Let's go through them. I chose ailments from suppressed anger. I think that's appropriate here because if you think about it, all of her symptoms started when she cooled off, when she was unwilling to respond and retaliate against the mother. She kind of suppressed those emotions, and they came out with all these physical health issues. The issue of clairvoyance. It shouldn't be. Okay. The issue of clairvoyance. The delusion that she hears footsteps. That's an interesting symptom. I've combined delusions she's neglected, delusions that she's persecuted. There's the fear at night, the suspiciousness, the discoloration of the tongue, which is red, the inflammation of the tongue, that symptom we were talking about earlier of external throat clothing aggravates, the eruptions on the upper limbs, these pimple-like eruptions, the swelling of the forearms, the swelling of the hands, this I think very interesting symptom of the perspiration staining the linen yellow. That's an interesting characteristic type of symptom in the case. And then these eruptions in her mouth, the vesicles in her mouth. And you can see the remedies that come up high in this particular repertorization. We see lachesis comes up number 1. Then we have arsenicum, crotalis cascavella, lycopodium, mercurius, belladonna, sulfur, rust tox, apis, aconite, and so on and so forth. So there's a number of possibilities here, and we could simply go and we could just start with lachesis, for example. We could double click on lachesis, and we could just go over to the keynotes of lachesis and begin to read about that and see if that fit the case, and then we could also search for it in other books as well, and it would be kind of the normal process of taking the top remedies in your repertorization and then seeing which one best fits the totality of the characteristic symptoms and really the idea behind those symptoms in the case. Let's go ahead and explore what happens when we look at this in the Vithoulkas compass. Okay, so we're back in the Vithoulkas compass. And you can see I've got 2 tabs here right now. I've got the Vithoulkas Compass tab. I've also got the one for the Materia Medica, because remember we were looking for the previous case at the remedy Ceanothus americanus. So I'm going to click on the tab over here for Vithoulkas Compass. Okay, and I've still got that old case there. So I can just go ahead and click on Close this analysis and close the case. Okay, get rid of all that. And now I'm back in my cases, and I want to create a new case. So I could click on New Case and just type in these symptoms, but for the purposes of being a little bit more expedient, I have already put this case in here. So you've already seen how to do this, and it's pretty easy. It's not particularly difficult. So let's just pull that case up and look at it. So I've titled that case Acquaintance Delusions. So these are where I have all of my saved cases, and I simply bring my mouse over to the case that I want to open. By the way, you can copy these cases here. You can move them, you can send them, and you can also delete them. So those are all different possibilities. You can very easily send these to somebody else that you might want to have review the case and perhaps give you some suggestions, or maybe you want to send it to somebody for publication or whatever. So I'm going to go ahead and double click on Acquaintance. And here you can see I've already I copied in the whole case as I read it to you earlier. So there's the whole case. Okay. Here is that analysis. I can have multiple analyses listed here. Okay, here's the first analysis. So I'll go ahead and click on that to open up the analysis. And here you'd see my 3 panes where I've got the case in the center. I've got my repertory here on the right-hand side that I can search and add rubrics. And you can see here the rubrics have already been added over here the mouth vesicles, the mouth inflammation tongue, the dirty yellow discoloration of the tongue, the clairvoyance, the various delusions which have been grouped together, the delusion of hearing the footsteps, the fear at night, the external throat clothing aggravates, the staining of the linen, and so on and so forth. Actually, some of these had been removed earlier, but it doesn't really matter. So I put all these in here, and if I want to see the results, I just click over here on where it says results. And interestingly enough, whereas in the numerical repertorization of the radar program, you had Lachesis arsenicum crotalis cascavella, here we can see that in the VithoulkasCompass, the first remedy coming up significantly greater than any of the others is actually crotalis cascavella. And interestingly, arsenicum doesn't even really show up very high here. If we click under large, Lachesis then does show up as the first. If we click under small, crotalis cascavella wins by quite a large margin. So again, I click on all, and again, crotalis cascavella is the top remedy. Now, this is interesting because crotalis cascavella clearly is the best remedy choice in this case. If you understand that remedy, you would understand it's a much better indicated remedy for this particular patient than is Lachesis. Lachesis would not suppress their emotions to the degree that is seen in this particular patient. That's one of the distinguishing features between Lachesis as a remedy and crotalis cascavella. They have many similarities. They both have the bleeding, they both have loquacity, they both have the external throat which is sensitive to touch. They both have the effect on the thickening of the tongue, hemorrhagic diathesis. So there's many similarities, as there are many similarities between Lachesis and many of the other snake remedies. But especially crotalis horridus and crotalis cascavella share many similarities to Lachesis because they all of those particular remedies contain a hemotoxic venom and also neurotoxic venom. So they have a similar type of effect on the prey which they bite, and therefore you would expect to see similar or comparable medicinal effects. And this is certainly the case when we look at Lachesis and crotalis cascavella. Now, why does Lachesis come up number one in a numerical repertorization? And actually, whenever you have to give a snake remedy, usually Lachesis comes up number one. It's because really Lachesis is the most overrepresented remedy, in my opinion, in all of the repertory and all of our materia medicas. The reason for this is, if you remember, I had mentioned earlier that Lachesis was first proven by Constantine Herring in July of 1828. It was a fairly well done proving. You could really see the clear picture of Lachesis emerge. It wasn't for another 20 to 30 years before the next snake remedy, crotalis horridus, was proven, and that proving wasn't nearly as good as the Lachesis proving. So as a consequence, whenever anybody needed any snake remedy, they usually ended up getting Lachesis because it was the one that was best proven, best understood, the one for which there was the greatest amount of clinical experience, and as a consequence, people, regardless of which snake remedy they might need, would get Lachesis. Now, might Lachesis work to a certain degree in these cases, even if it wasn't the best choice? Yes, there would be some similarity. As Hahnemann says in aphorism 156 of the Organon, the possibility of giving an exactly perfect remedy is very small. There's an infinite number of possibilities which exist in nature, and if there was only one perfect remedy for any particular case, you would have a hard time getting any type of results whatsoever. We want to give the best remedy from the list of available medicines. There certainly is one remedy which is the best from the list of available medicines, but there could be other things which have not yet been proven which could actually even be a better remedy. In this particular case, crotalis cascavella is the best remedy from the list of available choices. And the reason lachesis comes up so much is because every time somebody was given lachesis and there was some effect or change in the case, or even some improvement, even if it didn't completely cure the case, lachesis would be added to all of the rubrics corresponding to the symptoms which had changed, and those symptoms would get added to the materia medica of lachesis. And as a consequence, lachesis became an overrepresented remedy in our repertories and in our materia medicas. In any case, the beauty of this, as we can see, is that the VithoulkasCompass correctly suggested the best remedy choice, which was Crotalus cascavella. And we could read about this in the various sources, materia medica sources. I thought maybe perhaps I could just give you a very quick little rundown on Crotalus so you could see a little bit about this. What's very interesting about this snake is that, as I mentioned earlier, Herring originally proved lachesis in July of 1828. Interestingly enough, he was originally going to prove Crotalus cascavella, which is the Brazilian rattlesnake. But the species which he was going to conduct a proving on accidentally got shipped out of Suriname, and as a consequence, he ended up, as fate would have it, proving lachesis instead. And you can imagine the whole history of homeopathy might have been quite a bit different had he originally done the proving on Crotalus cascavella. We might be always talking about how Crotalus cascavella was the remedy that was overrepresented in our literature, and lachesis as being one which was not prescribed adequately based on the fact that it was not as well represented. But as fate would have it, it didn't turn out that particular way. So the scientific name, by the way, is Crotalus durissus. As I mentioned earlier, it contains both hemotoxic and neurotoxic components. It's quite a dangerous species, mostly found in the South America part of the world. It was originally proven by Benoit Muir from Brazil. He wrote The Poisonous Plants and Animals of the Brazilian Empire. He also proved Hura brasilianus and many other important remedies. Manzanella and other really good remedies. It affects the tissues to a lesser degree than Crotalus horridus. It doesn't cause quite as much hemorrhagic diathesis as you'll see in Crotalus horridus, although it certainly does have hemorrhagic diathesis. It affects very much the nervous system, both motor and sensory nerves, the eyes, as we'll see in a minute, the gastrointestinal tract. It does affect the blood, and unlike lachesis, it's a right-sided remedy. Whereas lachesis is a very active type of bleeding, Crotalus cascavella is more indicated for a passive type of hemorrhage, which is more similar to Crotalus horridus, passive, oozing, dark, necrotic type blood. And it has these very characteristic lancinating pains, especially in the eyeballs. It has a really strong affinity for the eye, and all of these lancinating pains are very much affected by cold applications. You can also see lancinating pains in the uterus and the anus. Again, when washing with cold water, you've got this idea of lancinating pains that are aggravated by cold water or cold applications. And you've also got this interesting sensation. You won't see it obviously in every case, but the sensation of a string or a band. There's other remedies, of course, that can have this. Anacardium can have it. Cenchrus can have it, other remedies, but it's very, very characteristic of Crotalus cascavella. And like the other snake remedies, it has this sensitivity to the clothing, especially around the throat, but also the stomach and the abdomen. You can also see this in some non-snake remedies like Calcarea carbonica, Nux vomica, Spongia as well. Very much aggravated at night, and also especially by any type of cold washing. So we saw that in the case where the patient was aggravated at night. And they have this kind of interesting sensation of a compressing of the skull, like the brain is in an iron helmet. And they also have a weird sensation as if somebody's walking inside the head like a circle. So you see this idea of a circle. It's very typical, like this band sensation, circle in the head. And you also see that many of their eruptions, especially the rashes, the urticaria, is oftentimes very large and circular in appearance. This idea of circular manifestations is typical for Crotalus cascavella. It's a good remedy in glaucoma, in iritis, with a cutting pain around the eyeball, as if the eyeball was being taken out with a penknife or a sharp tool. And it's also a good remedy for nosebleeds, epistaxis with a bright blood, especially when they're starting to fall asleep, and you'll have this bloody serum that'll run from the nose. Like lachesis and many of the other snake remedies, nausea, for example, they've got a very strong aggravation from sleep. Not as much as lachesis, because lachesis has this to a tremendous degree. And they also have a keynote, which is a headache after the sleep as well, which again you'll also see in lachesis. Like other remedies, I mentioned this earlier, they have this thick speech and the paresis of the tongue, very characteristic. You see this very strongly in Crotalus cascavella. You see it very strongly in lachesis. You see it in Dendroapis polyepsis. You can see it to a certain degree in Crotalus horridus. So a vipera can have it as well. And like many other snake remedies, they have this difficulty to swallow. The food will gag in their throat. They may only be able to swallow liquids. Solids will be very, very difficult for them to swallow. And again, this is typical of snake remedies in general. One very bizarre symptom is they can have a very ravenous appetite, which vanishes when they see something, when they see some food, and they have a craving to eat snow. I've never seen this, but it's in the literature. They can oftentimes have aversion to beef, bread, food, meat, red and white wine. And you can think of this as a good remedy in metrorrhagia during menopause, again with those lancinating pains in the uterus, and again aggravated by washing with cold water. That's the big modality: washing with cold water, lancinating in a combination with lancinating pains. It's very typical of Crotalus cascavella. They can oftentimes have paralysis after apoplexy, after stroke. It's a very important remedy for stroke, especially with right-sided paralysis, where the speech gets affected, the thick tongue, and they have this snoring, stertorous type of respiration. And they can also have a sensation that the right leg is shortened. And here you can see these obstinate cases of urticaria, of hives, which are intensely red, large patches, and they have this kind of circular appearance. You can actually see this in the photo here, where they have this kind of circular look to them. Again, that idea of some type of circular manifestation appearing in different areas for Crotalus cascavella. In addition to this sensitivity to clothes, the hives are very sensitive to clothes, and you can see this as soon as they get the urticaria and anything touches it, clothes touch it, they start to scream. Very sensitive to this, very, very intolerant of any type of clothing in general, but also during urticaria outbreaks. And like both Bothrops lanceolatus, which is another snake remedy, and Crotalus horridus, which is the timber rattlesnake, this is a very important remedy for aphasia after a stroke, aphasia after apoplexy, where they lose their language abilities. We think of Bothrops, Crotalus cascavella, and Crotalus horridus as the three big snake remedies. Of course, we have Onynthes crocata, we have Stramonium, we have Burrita carbotica, plumbum, or other remedies that are important. But if you have that symptom and then you see any of the symptoms that are like the external throat clothing aggravates, or the thickness of the tongue, or some type of hemorrhagic diathesis, then we will immediately think of the possibility of a snake remedy. On the mental plane, one of the main feelings that we see in Crotalus cascavella is a feeling of being cheated, especially by people who are close to them. And this is exactly what we saw in that case, that the Cinderella complex, she's being cheated by the mother-in-law. And they have a lot of grudges, and they can feel very revengeful, but unlike lachesis, they don't have the power to retaliate. And this is the distinguishing feature which we saw was so beautifully brought up by the VithoulkasCompass. It was able to show us, yes, okay, lachesis is well represented, it's overrepresented, the numerical repertorization shows lachesis, but the VithoulkasCompass was able to see, was able to recognize that the better choice was Crotalus cascavella. And again, one of the primary reasons for this is that it does not have this power to retaliate, whereas lachesis will be extremely manipulative, cunning, revengeful, and will act out in a very specific way to get revenge, and will not hold back. So this is a remedy that has a lot of suppressed angers. They can have outbursts, and they can blow up and even strike, but generally the tendency is to hold back and to suppress their anger, as we saw in that case. There's also a very strong feeling of isolation, which generally arrives from a feeling of being unloved and forsaken. This is common to the snake remedies, a feeling of being forsaken. You see it in most of them, but it's very, very strong in Crotalus cascavella, and it manifests as a feeling of isolation. so isolated that they get a feeling of being an outcast, that they're separate from their society, from their family, from their members. And this is exactly how this woman felt in the context of her siblings and her father. At first, they were all together in their concerns about the stepmother taking some of the property, but eventually they realized it was perhaps unfounded. She could not get over that, and she actually felt as an outcast. And they get a sense of actually persecution from this, and they can even feel that there are people behind them. And we saw this in the idea of the walking footsteps that was in the case. So you can see there's these feelings of persecution and fears and delusions of spirits, ghosts, monsters. There's this whole kind of eerie, creepy feeling about VithoulkasCompass, and we saw that element in the case. It's kind of a clairvoyant deja vu element where they hear voices or hear footsteps, something's behind them. The idea of something behind them is characteristic of the snake remedies, but this kind of ghost feeling is very typical of VithoulkasCompass. And these fears of VithoulkasCompass will tend to occur at night, and that's exactly what we saw in the case. Her fears were specifically at nighttime. Feeling of persecution, all this can get to the point where these people who need VithoulkasCompass can approach a level of being actually paranoid schizophrenics. This is the degree to which the pathology can manifest. Like lachesis, there's lots of loquacity. They can love bustling crowds and lots of activity, but they can also experience lots of weakness from pleasure. Lachesis more has guilt from pleasure. Here we see a type of weakness. And they can be very egotistical, like lachesis or lycopodium, platina, veratrum album, any of those remedies. And they can be jealous, malicious, and source, any of the things that we see, competitive, that we see with lachesis. But again, they tend to hold back and suppress their emotions much more than you'll see in lachesis. Lots of jealousy and being forsaken. Again, this is common to many of the snakes. They can oftentimes have feelings of being duty-bound. We see this even more strongly in nausea, which is the Indian cobra. And the dutiness can be towards family members, but then they have this feeling of being cheated, forsaken, insulted, and then they will become antagonistic with themselves, where they feel duty-bound, but also they have this contradiction in themselves, this antagonism, where they feel cheated, and yet they feel that they shouldn't feel that way because of their feelings of duty towards the family or friend. There's also this idea of a magnetic state, and this was described by the patient, where they feel that they're in a kind of magnetic state, or there's a magnetic state that's controlling them. And there was also this idea of a kind of feeling of clairvoyance, and this also came out in the case as well, where there's a lack of boundaries. It's almost like a combination. It's not to say lachesis doesn't have it, it does, but it's more prominent in VithoulkasCompass. It's almost like a combination of the phosphorus clairvoyance with lachesis. That combination would be similar to what you might see in VithoulkasCompass. And in the later stages, you can really see they become very paranoid with all kinds of delusions of ghosts and giant black skeletons that can get very intense. They can have dreams of battles and conflict. All their dreams are really about their inability to express their feelings, express their emotions, holding back. And that's why they have dreams of battles and anger and fighting for her rights and those unsuccessful efforts to harm others. It's a holding back type of dream. Okay, you can even see this feeling of powerlessness in the idea of that their brakes don't work. If your brakes don't work, then you're going to get into an accident. You don't have control over your own life, or your jaws are stuck together. You can't express your feelings, or your teeth break off. How are you going to be able to pronounce your words and express yourself? Again, this all fits into this idea of suppressing the emotions and not feeling the power to take charge for how you feel you're being forsaken or cheated in life. Okay. So anyway, I think you can see how when we look at the materia medica, it really did fit the case. And what was lovely is how the VithoulkasCompass expert system was able to identify the remedy as the top choice, whereas that did not occur with the numerical repertorization. Now,